Lillian Hayes was on her knees in the mud outside the mercantile gathering spilled flour with her bare hands when Constance Caldwell's voice cut through the street. "Leave it. A woman like you has no business touching anything that belongs to decent people." Lillian froze. Every eye on Main Street turned toward her. Then a stranger's boots stopped beside the spilled sack. A tall rancher knelt down, looked her straight in the eye, and said the words that would change everything. "Ma'am, I don't know what you did to deserve an apology, but you're getting one from me anyway." Nobody in Willow Creek had ever defended Lillian Hayes. Until today. Before we continue this story, take a second to hit that subscribe button and stay with me until the very end. And in the comments, tell me what city you're watching from tonight. I love seeing just how far this story has traveled. The flour sack had split open the moment it hit the ground. White dust rose into the cold morning air and settled over Lillian's hands, her sleeves the hem of her only good dress. She didn't cry out. She didn't ask for help. She simply knelt down in the mud outside Dunmore's mercantile and began scooping the ruined flour back into the burlap, because if she didn't, Horace Dunmore would dock her wages for the loss, and she couldn't afford that. She couldn't afford anything. "Leave it!" Constance Caldwell's voice arrived like a slap. Lillian looked up. The banker's wife stood on the boardwalk in a green traveling coat. Her gloved hands folded, her mouth already curling with the particular satisfaction of a woman who enjoyed being right about people. "A woman like you has no business touching anything that belongs to decent people," Constance said. "You'll only ruin it further." A small crowd had gathered, the way crowds always gathered in Willow Creek when someone was being humiliated quietly, almost politely. Nobody quite looking directly at Lillian, everybody watching all the same. "I was only trying to help Mrs. Caldwell," Lillian said. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted it to. "Help!" Constance repeated the word like it tasted wrong in her mouth. "Is that what you call it? I've heard you call scrubbing floors honest work too. I suppose a person with no name and no family has to call everything something better than what it is." Somewhere behind Lillian, a man chuckled. She didn't turn to see who. "Get up," Constance said. "You're embarrassing yourself." Lillian's hands were shaking now, though she told herself it was the cold. She rose slowly, flour dust falling from her skirt like snow that had no business falling in October. "I'll pay for the sack," Lillian said quietly. "With what?" Constance's eyebrows lifted. "Everyone in this town knows you barely earn enough at that laundry to keep yourself fed. I don't know why Mr. Dunmore even allows you credit." "I don't take credit, Mrs. Caldwell." "No," Constance said, and smiled the way a cat smiles at something it has already decided to toy with. "You just take up space that decent God-fearing families could use. Tell me, Lillian, in all your 24 years, has anyone ever once been glad you existed?" The street went silent. Lillian felt something crack open in her chest, an old wound reopening in a place that had never fully healed. She thought of her mother's hands. She thought of the fever that took both her parents within 4 days of each other when she was 16. She thought of every boarding house, every temporary job, every kind word that turned out to be a lie designed to get something from her. She thought of Horace Dunmore's voice from 3 years back, the first time she'd asked him for work. "Women like you should be grateful for whatever kindness they receive." She had believed him. She had spent 8 years believing him. "I asked you a question," Constance pressed. That was the exact moment a stranger's boots stopped in the mud beside the ruined flour sack. Lillian hadn't noticed him arrive. Nobody had, which was strange because Nathan Cole was not a small man, and Willow Creek was not a large town. He knelt down without a word, gathered the split burlap sack with 2 hands like it was worth something, and looked up not at Constance, but at Lillian. "Ma'am," he said, "I don't know what you did to deserve an apology, but you're getting one from me anyway. I should have watched where I was walking." Lillian stared at him. "You didn't do anything, sir." "I'm aware." Nathan stood flour dust on his knees and turned to face Constance Caldwell with an expression that was polite in exactly the way a closed door is polite. "Ma'am, I don't believe we've met." Nathan Cole. I run the Cole Ranch 11 miles west. Constance's whole posture changed. Everyone in the territory knew the name Cole. Mr. Cole, we've heard a great deal about you. I didn't realize you were in town. I am. His eyes hadn't left Lillian. And I couldn't help but overhear you asking this woman a question. I'd like to answer it if you don't mind. Has anyone ever been glad she existed? Nathan repeated the question slowly, like he was turning it over and finding it uglier each time. Yes, ma'am. I am right now standing here. Glad to see a person willing to kneel in the mud and clean up a mess instead of walking past it like everybody else on this street just did. Nobody spoke. Now. Nathan reached into his coat and set $2 silver into Horace Dunmore's hand, who had appeared in the mercantile doorway sometime during the exchange without anyone noticing. That should cover the flour. And anything else this young lady might need today, put it on my account. Lillian's breath caught. Sir, I can't accept. You're not accepting charity, Nathan said gently, but firmly, still not looking away from her. You're accepting an apology on behalf of a town that owes you a great many of them. Constance Caldwell's mouth opened and closed twice before any sound came out. Then she gathered her skirts, muttered something about being late, and disappeared down the boardwalk, with her heels striking the wood like small gunshots. The crowd dispersed slowly the way crowds do when the entertainment has stopped being entertaining and started being uncomfortable. Lillian stood alone with a stranger in the mud flour still dusted across her hands. You didn't need to do that, she said. I know. Then why did you? Nathan considered the question like it deserved real consideration. Because I've spent 6 years watching men build fences to keep other people's cattle off their land, and I've never once seen anybody build a fence to keep cruelty off a person. Seemed like somebody ought to start. Lillian didn't know what to say to that. Nobody had ever spoken to her like this, like her dignity was something worth defending, not something she had to earn back one apology at a time. I should get back to the laundry, she said finally. Mrs. Higgins will dock my pay if I'm late. Of course. Nathan stepped back, giving her room, and something about the gesture, the way he made space instead of closing it, struck her as strange in a way she couldn't name. Might I ask your name? Lillian Hayes. Well, Miss Hayes. He touched the brim of his hat. I hope our paths cross again. She walked away without answering, because she didn't trust her voice, and because some old tired part of her was already waiting for the moment this kindness revealed itself to be something else. It always did. It always had. She was wrong about that. But she wouldn't know it for weeks yet. The laundry smelled the way it always smelled: lye soap and steam, and the particular exhaustion of other people's dirt. Mrs. Higgins ran the place with a ledger in one hand and suspicion in the other, and she looked up the moment Lillian walked through the door, flour still faintly visible on her sleeves. You're 11 minutes late. There was an incident on Main Street, Mrs. Higgins. There's always an incident with you. Mrs. Higgins didn't look up from her ledger. I don't pay you to have incidents. I pay you to wash linens. Yes, ma'am. Lillian went to the wash tubs without another word, because arguing never changed anything. It only cost her more than she had to spend. She plunged her hands into water hot enough to redden her skin and thought about the stranger's face, the way he'd knelt in the mud, like her humiliation was something worth interrupting. Glad to see a person willing to kneel in the mud and clean up a mess. Nobody had ever said something like that to her. She turned the words over and over, searching for the trick hidden inside them, because kindness without a trick was not a thing Lillian Hayes had encountered in 8 years of trying. You're scrubbing that shirt hard enough to wear a hole through it, said a voice beside her. Lillian looked up. Ruth Ann Colby, the only other washerwoman under 30, was watching her with the particular curiosity of someone who had heard a rumor and wanted it confirmed. Sorry. I heard Nathan Cole gave Constance Caldwell a talking to on Main Street this morning. Ruth Ann's eyes were bright. I heard he called you a lady in front of half the town. It wasn't like that. Lillian Hayes. Ruth Ann set down the shirt she'd been folding. Do you have any idea who that man is? He's the wealthiest rancher in 3 counties. Eligible, unmarried. Half the mothers in this town have been trying to put their daughters in front of him for 2 years, and he's never so much as tipped his hat at any of them. He was just being decent, Lillian said. That's all. It doesn't mean anything. Maybe not to you. Lillian scrubbed harder. She didn't want to hope. Hope was expensive, and she'd already spent everything she had on it years ago before she learned that hope was just disappointment that hadn't happened yet. The next 4 days passed the way every day passed for Lillian Hayes. Wash tubs before dawn deliveries at noon, mending by candlelight until her eyes burned. She didn't see Nathan Cole again, and she told herself that was for the best, that whatever strange kindness had moved through him on Main Street had likely already been forgotten. She was wrong. On the 5th morning, as she carried a basket of folded linens toward the Baxter house, a voice stopped her outside the general store. "Miss Hayes?" She turned. Nathan Cole stood by a wagon loaded with feed sacks, hat in his hands, like he'd removed it specifically for this moment. "Mr. Cole." She adjusted her grip on the basket, suddenly aware of how worn her sleeves were, how tired her hands must look. "I didn't expect to see you again. I've been in town settling accounts. Thought I'd ask you something before I rode back out." He hesitated, which surprised her. He hadn't seemed like a man who hesitated. "I need help at the ranch. My housekeeper, Mrs. Whitfield, is getting on in years and can't manage the whole house alone anymore. I'm looking to hire someone reliable, someone with a strong back and an honest disposition." Lillian's stomach tightened. "You're offering me work." "I am." "Why me?" "Because I watched you kneel in the mud to clean up a mess that wasn't your fault in front of a woman insulting you without a single word of complaint." Nathan's voice was steady. "That told me more about your character than any letter of reference could. Mr. Cole, I appreciate the offer truly, but I don't know you. I don't know your ranch, your household, what's expected of me there. That's fair?" He nodded. "Ride out and see it for yourself before you decide. Talk to Mrs. Whitfield. If it isn't right for you, you ride back, no obligation, and I won't ask again." Lillian studied his face, searching the way she always searched for the crack where the trick was hiding. She didn't find one. That unsettled her more than finding one would have. "I'll think about it," she said. "That's all I'm asking." He set his hat back on his head and turned toward the wagon, and Lillian stood on the boardwalk with her basket of linens, feeling something dangerous stir in her chest, something that felt uncomfortably close to hope. She didn't sleep that night. She lay in the narrow room above the laundry, staring at the water-stained ceiling, running through every reason this was a mistake. Men who offered kindness to poor women rarely offered it for free. She'd learned that lesson at 17 from a shopkeeper's son who'd smiled at her for 2 weeks before making it clear exactly what he expected in return. She'd learned it again at 20 from a family in Cheyenne who'd hired her as a companion and then treated her as something closer to property. Women like you should be grateful for whatever kindness they receive. Horace Dunmore's words had followed her for 8 years, and some nights she believed them so completely that she could feel the truth of them in her bones, like a break that had healed wrong. But then she thought of Nathan Cole kneeling in the mud. The way he hadn't looked away from her, even when Constance Caldwell was trying to shrink her down to nothing. The way he'd said ride out and see it for yourself, instead of insisting, instead of pushing, instead of making the decision feel like something she owed him. By morning, she'd made up her mind. She would go. Not because she trusted him, she didn't, not yet, but because staying in Willow Creek, scrubbing other people's linens until her hands bled, believing Constance Caldwell's cruelty was the closest thing to truth she'd ever get, had stopped being a life she could bear to keep living. The ride to the Cole Ranch took the better part of 2 hours in a hired cart, and Lillian spent every minute of it rehearsing reasons to turn back. She didn't turn back. When the ranch house came into view, long solid smoke curling from its chimney, a woman was already standing on the porch. Arms crossed, watching the cart approach, with an expression that gave nothing away. "You'll be Lillian Hayes," the woman said once Lillian had climbed down. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Agnes Whitfield. I've kept this house 11 years, and I'll tell you plainly I didn't ask Mr. Cole to hire help. I can manage fine on my own." "I understand, ma'am. I don't want to take anything from you." Agnes studied her for a long moment, the way older women study younger ones when they're deciding whether to trust their instincts. Well, you've got calluses on your hands, and you look me in the eye when you talk. That's more than I can say for the last 3 girls he tried to hire. He's tried before, twice. Both times some fool woman thought working here meant she'd be married into this ranch inside a year, started acting like the lady of the house before she'd swept a single floor. Mr. Cole sent them both packing. Agnes's mouth twitched almost a smile. "You don't strike me as the type." "No, ma'am. I just need honest work." "Good. Come inside. Let's see if you can actually clean or if you just talk like you can." Lillian followed her in, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something other than dread walking through a stranger's door. Nathan found her an hour later on her knees, scrubbing the kitchen floor sleeves, rolled to her elbows, hair coming loose from its pins. "Mrs. Whitfield says you work harder than the last 3 combined." Lillian looked up startled. "I didn't hear you come in." "I have a habit of that." He leaned against the doorframe. "Does that mean you're staying?" "I haven't decided yet." "Fair enough." He almost smiled. "Take your time deciding. The floor's not going anywhere." She went back to scrubbing, and he didn't leave. He simply stood there a moment longer, watching her work with an expression she couldn't read before saying quietly, "Miss Hayes, I want to be plain with you about something, so there's no confusion between us." Lillian's hands stilled. Here it was, she thought. The trick finally showing itself. "I'm not offering you this position because I expect anything from you beyond honest work," Nathan said. "I've seen how this town treats women who have no family to stand behind them, and I don't much care for it. That's the whole of my reasoning. Nothing more complicated than that. Why does it matter to you?" The question came out sharper than she intended. Why does a wealthy rancher care what happens to a woman nobody else in this county gives a second thought to? Something shifted in Nathan's face, a flicker of old grief there, and gone so fast she almost missed it. "Because 6 years ago," he said quietly, "I watched this town be cruel to someone I loved, and I stood by and let it happen because I was too proud or too afraid to say anything. I've regretted it every day since. I don't intend to make that mistake twice." Lillian's breath caught. There was a whole story buried in those words, a story he clearly wasn't ready to tell, and something in her, some instinct she hadn't trusted in years, told her not to push. "I'm sorry," she said instead. "Don't be. It's mine to carry." He straightened the moment closing as quickly as it had opened. "The position's yours if you want it, Miss Hayes. Room board and fair wages. Mrs. Whitfield could use the help, and this house could use someone in it who isn't afraid of hard work." Lillian looked around the kitchen. The good stove, the solid table, the light coming clean through real glass windows, and thought of the narrow room above the laundry, the water stains on the ceiling, Mrs. Higgins's ledger, and her endless suspicion. "I'll stay," she said, "on a trial basis, 1 month." 1 month, Nathan agreed. "And if at the end of it you want to leave, I'll drive you back to town myself, no hard feelings." He extended his hand, and Lillian shook it and told herself firmly that this was simply an arrangement of labor for wages. Nothing more. Nothing that deserved the strange warmth spreading through her chest. She was already lying to herself. She just didn't know it yet. The first 2 weeks passed in a rhythm Lillian had never experienced before work, that was hard but not humiliating, a household that ran on routine instead of cruelty. A rancher who thanked her for small things nobody had ever thanked her for. "Thank you for the coffee, Miss Hayes." "Thank you for mending that shirt, Miss Hayes. I'd have gone another year with that tear in the sleeve. Thank you for staying up with the mayor last night. Mrs. Whitfield told me she was foaling early. That wasn't part of your work, and I won't forget it." Small things. Ordinary things, and yet each one landed on Lillian like water on dry ground, soaking into places that had been cracked and parched for years. She began to notice things about Nathan that surprised her. He asked her opinion on household matters and actually waited for her answer. He ate breakfast with the ranch hands instead of separately, and treated Agnes Whitfield with the same respect he showed the bank manager in town. He was quiet in a way that wasn't cold quiet, in the way of a man who had learned that most things worth saying didn't need to be said loudly. One morning over coffee before sunrise, she found the courage to ask him something that had been sitting in her chest for days. "Mr. Cole, may I ask you something personal?" "You may ask. I can't promise I'll answer." "That's fair." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "You mentioned once that you'd regretted staying silent while this town was cruel to someone you loved. I don't mean to pry. I only wondered, is that why you never married?" Nathan was quiet long enough that she regretted asking. "Her name was Sarah," he said finally. "We were engaged to be married 6 years back. Her family didn't approve of me, thought a rancher wasn't good enough for a judge's daughter. When her father found out we intended to marry regardless, he sent her east to live with relatives. I never saw her again. Never got the chance to fight for her the way I should have." "I'm so sorry, Nathan." It was the first time she'd used his given name. He noticed. She saw him notice, saw something soften in his expression. "I built fences after that," he said. "Around the ranch, around myself. Told myself it was easier to be alone than to lose someone else I loved." He looked at her, then steady and unflinching. "I've been reconsidering that lately." Lillian's heart stumbled. "Have you?" "I have." Neither of them said anything more. But something had shifted between them, quiet and undeniable, like a door that had been locked for 6 years, finally easing open on its hinges. The trouble began, as a trouble in small towns always does, with a whisper that traveled faster than truth ever could. It was Ruth Ann who brought the news, riding out to the ranch under the pretense of delivering mended linens, though Lillian suspected the real errand was gossip. "They're talking about you in town," Ruth Ann said, glancing around the kitchen before lowering her voice. "About you and Mr. Cole." Lillian's hands stilled over the bread dough. "Talking how Constance Caldwell's been telling anyone who'll listen that you've bewitched him somehow, that a woman with no name and no money has no business getting ideas above her station." Ruth Ann's face was sympathetic, but her eyes were bright with the thrill of delivering bad news. "She says it won't last. She says men like Nathan Cole don't marry women like you, they just use them and move on." The words landed exactly where Constance had intended them to land all those weeks ago, and again now, right in the old wound, the one that had never fully closed. "That's not what's happening here," Lillian said, though her voice wavered. "I know that. I'm just telling you what's being said." Ruth Ann squeezed her arm. "Be careful, Lillian. This town doesn't forgive a woman for rising above where they've decided she belongs." After Ruth Ann left, Lillian stood alone in the kitchen for a long time, flour dust on her hands, again feeling something she thought she'd buried rising back to the surface. Some people were simply born to be forgotten. She had believed that once. She had almost stopped believing it these past weeks, and now the belief was creeping back in like cold air through a cracked window. That evening, Nathan found her sitting alone on the porch steps, watching the sun go down over land that would never belong to her, no matter how long she stayed. "You've been quiet all evening," he said, sitting down beside her. "I'm only tired." "Lillian." He said her name gently, but with enough weight that she knew he wasn't going to let the lie stand. "What happened?" She hesitated, then told him about Ruth Ann's visit, about Constance's whispers, about the old fear that had never really left her, no matter how kindly this ranch had treated her these past weeks. Nathan listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Do you believe them?" he asked. "Constance and the rest of them?" "I don't know what I believe anymore. I do." He turned to face her fully. "I believe a person's worth was never something this town had the right to decide. I believe you've done more honest work in 3 weeks than half this territory does in a year. And I believe—" He stopped himself and for a moment Lillian thought he might not finish the sentence. "You believe what?" she pressed. "I believe I've been building fences for 6 years to keep myself safe from ever loving anyone again," he said quietly. "And I believe you've walked straight through every one of them without even trying." Lillian's breath caught in her throat. Before she could find any words to answer him, hoofbeats sounded on the road leading up to the ranch, fast, urgent, the particular rhythm of a rider bringing news that couldn't wait for morning. Nathan stood immediately, every soft edge in his expression hardening back into the rancher who ran 11 miles of cattle land and knew trouble when he heard it approaching. The rider was one of Nathan's own hands, a young man named Cody, and he pulled his horse up hard enough that it nearly reared. "Mr. Cole, you need to see this right away." "What is it?" Cody dismounted, breathing hard, and pulled a folded paper from inside his coat. "Land agent came by the eastern boundary this afternoon while you were in with Miss Hayes. Man named Silas Whitmore. Said he's got documents proving your daddy never held clear title to the north pasture, the whole 1,100 acres. Says the county's set to reopen the land claim inside 30 days. Nathan went very still. "That's impossible. My father homesteaded that land in '68. I've got the deed in my study right now." "That's what I told him, sir. He just smiled and said deeds can be wrong. Said he'd be back to discuss it proper. Left this for you." Nathan took the paper, unfolded it, and Lillian watched his face change as he read confusion first. Then something darker. Something that looked almost like fear beneath the anger. "Nathan," she said softly. "What is it?" He looked up at her, and for the first time since she'd known him, Nathan Cole looked like a man standing on ground that was no longer solid beneath his feet. "It's a notice," he said slowly, "informing me that in 30 days a judge in Cheyenne is going to decide whether this ranch, the house you're standing in right now, the land your feet are standing on, still belongs to my family at all." Nathan stood on the porch with the paper still in his hand, and for the first time since Lillian had known him, he looked like a man who didn't know which direction to move in. "Read it again," Lillian said quietly. "Out loud. Sometimes hearing the words makes them make sense." Nathan's jaw tightened, but he read, "Notice of Land Claim Review, filed by Whitmore and Associates Territorial Land Verification. Grounds irregularity in original homestead filing section 14, Township 9 North Range. Hearing scheduled 30 days from this notice, County Courthouse, Cheyenne." Cody shifted his weight hat still in his hands. "There's more, sir. He said Whitmore said there's a name on an older claim. Said somebody filed on that land before your daddy ever did. Said your daddy's deed might not hold up once the judge sees the older paper." "That's not possible." Nathan's voice had gone hard and flat. "My father built this house with his own hands. I was born in that room upstairs. There is no older claim. I'm just telling you what he told me to tell you." Nathan folded the paper once sharp, like he was trying to fold his temper along with it. "Where is he now, Whitmore?" "Said he'd taken a room at the hotel in town. Said he'd be back out this way in a few days to discuss terms." Terms. Nathan repeated the word like it had a bad taste. "There's nothing to discuss. That land has been in my family for 17 years. "Nathan." Lillian touched his arm, and he stopped some of the tightness in his shoulders, easing at the contact. "Shouting at Cody won't fix it. What does your deed say? You mentioned you have it in the study." "I do." He was already moving toward the door. "I'll show you both. There's no irregularity. My father was careful about everything, especially that land." Sugh. The study smelled of leather and lamp oil, and Nathan went straight to a locked drawer beneath the desk, pulling out a tin box that hadn't been opened from the look of the dust on its lid in years. He set it on the desk and opened it with hands that weren't quite steady. Deeds. Letters. A marriage certificate for his parents, brittle at the edges. And beneath all of it, a folded document with an official territorial seal, the ink faded to brown. "Here." He spread it flat. "Homestead certificate issued 1868 to Elias Cole. Witnessed and recorded at the county office in Cheyenne." Lillian leaned over the desk, studying the paper with more attention than Nathan seemed to expect. He noticed. You read documents like you know what you're looking at, he said. I worked for a family in Cheyenne once before I came back to Willow Creek. The husband was a circuit judge. I helped his clerk file paperwork for 2 years, deeds, wills, land claims. I know more about how these things are supposed to look than most people would guess. She pointed to the seal in the corner. This seal. Does it look right to you? Nathan frowned, leaning closer. I don't know what I'm looking for. The territorial recorder's seal changed in 1872. Before that it was round with an eagle in the center. After it was oval with a star. She tapped the paper. This seal is round, which means your father's deed was recorded before the change exactly when it should have been. If someone wanted to claim this deed was fraudulent, they'd need to prove the seal was wrong for the date. It isn't. Then we have nothing to worry about. We have something to worry about, Lillian said carefully, but it isn't your deed. It's whatever document Whitmore claims predates it. If someone's willing to challenge a 17-year-old homestead claim, they didn't do it on a whim. Someone paid for this, Nathan. Land claims like this don't just appear out of nowhere. Nathan sat down slowly in the chair behind the desk, staring at the tin box like it had betrayed him. Then I need to go to the county recorder's office, he said. Tomorrow, first light. I'm coming with you. Lillian, this isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment you offered me a home in this house, she said, and the words surprised her as much as they surprised him. Besides, you need someone who knows how to read a filing book without letting the clerk see they're being watched too closely. Nathan looked at her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes. Gratitude, maybe, or something warmer than gratitude. All right, he said. First light. The county recorder's office in Cheyenne was a squat brick building that smelled of old paper and pipe smoke, and the clerk behind the counter, a thin man named Prescott, went pale the moment Nathan gave his name. Cole, Prescott repeated. Section 14, Township 9. That's right. I'll need to pull the book. Prescott's hands were unsteady as he turned toward the shelves behind him. Give me a moment. Lillian watched him closely while he searched, noting the way his eyes kept flicking back toward them, the way his fingers fumbled twice before finding the right volume. He's nervous, she murmured to Nathan. I noticed. Prescott returned with a heavy ledger and laid it open on the counter, and Nathan leaned over it immediately, scanning for his father's name. There, he pointed. Elias Cole, Section 14. He stopped. The entry was there, but the edge of the page, right where a second filing should have appeared beneath it, had been cut. Not torn, cut clean and deliberate with something sharp. What happened to this page? Nathan's voice had gone dangerously quiet. Prescott's face went from pale to gray. I couldn't say, Mr. Cole. Pages get damaged sometimes. Water mice. This isn't damage. Lillian's finger traced the clean edge of the cut. Mice don't use a straight razor, Mr. Prescott. Someone removed a page from this book on purpose. Recently, from the look of the paper, the cut edge isn't yellowed like the rest of the page. I wouldn't know anything about that. Prescott wouldn't meet her eyes. Who's had access to this ledger in the last month? Nathan asked. Anyone with proper business, Mr. Cole. I can't recall every try. Prescott swallowed hard. There was a gentleman. Came through about 3 weeks back. Said he was doing a survey for the Territorial Land Office. Reviewed several books, this one included. Whitmore, Nathan said. He didn't give his name to me directly, sir. But I believe yes. I believe that might have been him. Nathan's hands flattened on the counter, and for a moment, Lillian thought he might tear the ledger apart right there. Someone cut a page out of your official record, he said slowly. And now that same page is missing exactly where a second claim on my land would need to appear if one existed. That's not a coincidence, Prescott. That's a forgery being built one piece at a time. Mr. Cole, I can't speak to any of that. I only keep the books. Then keep them better, Nathan snapped, and turned toward the door, Lillian following quickly behind him. Outside, the street was busy with midday traffic, and Nathan stood on the courthouse steps, breathing like a man trying to keep his temper from running him straight back inside. "He's building a case out of nothing," Nathan said. "Cutting pages, forging older claims, convincing a judge there's a discrepancy that never existed until 3 weeks ago. Which means someone with money and patience is behind this," Lillian said. "A land agent doesn't do this kind of work for free, and he doesn't do it without a client waiting to benefit." "Who benefits from taking my land?" Before Lillian could answer, a voice slid into the conversation from behind them, smooth and unhurried. "That," the voice said, "is an excellent question, Mr. Cole." They turned. A man stood at the base of the steps, dressed sharper than anyone had a right to be dressed in a territory built on mud and cattle, a gray suit, a gold watch chain, a smile that had clearly been practiced in front of a mirror. "Silas Whitmore," the man said, extending a hand. Nathan didn't take. "I believe you received my notice." "I received your forgery," Nathan said. "I've just come from the recorder's office. Someone cut a page out of the county ledger, Whitmore. I wonder who might have done that." Whitmore's smile didn't waver. "Ledgers get damaged all the time, Mr. Cole. It's unfortunate but hardly unusual in territories with such limited record-keeping resources. You were seen in that office 3 weeks ago. I was conducting a legitimate survey on behalf of my client. I'm not responsible for the condition of public records I happen to review." Whitmore's eyes moved to Lillian, lingering a moment too long. "And who might this be?" "Your housekeeper." "That's none of your concern," Nathan said, stepping half a pace forward, putting himself between Whitmore and Lillian without seeming to think about it. "No offense intended." Whitmore lifted both hands in mock surrender. "I only mention it because appearances matter greatly in a courtroom, Mr. Cole. A man defending his family legacy is a sympathetic figure. A man who's taken up with a woman of questionable background, shall we say, that plays rather differently in front of a judge." Lillian felt the words land exactly where they were meant to land, and she saw Nathan's whole body go rigid beside her. "Say what you actually mean," Nathan said, low and dangerous. "I mean nothing beyond friendly advice freely given." Whitmore's smile widened. "I'll be filing the formal challenge with the court in Cheyenne within the week. I'd encourage you to secure proper legal representation, Mr. Cole. This process moves quickly once it begins, and 30 days is not a great deal of time." "Who's your client, Whitmore?" "That information is confidential at this stage of proceedings." Whitmore straightened his cuffs. "But I imagine you'll learn soon enough. These things have a way of revealing themselves." He tipped his hat toward Lillian, an insult disguised as courtesy, and walked away down the street without another word. Nathan stood watching him go, hands curled into fists at his sides. "Nathan." Lillian's voice was quiet but urgent. "You need a lawyer. Today. Someone who can move as fast as he's moving." They found Thomas Ellery in a small office above the Mercantile, a young lawyer with ink-stained fingers, and the kind of earnest exhaustion that came from a practice built mostly on cases nobody else wanted. He listened to the whole account without interrupting, his frown deepening with every detail. "A cut page in the county ledger," he said finally, "combined with a mysterious older claim that suddenly surfaced after 17 years of silence filed by an out-of-territory land agent who won't name his client. Mr. Cole, I'll be honest with you. This has the shape of something I've heard about before. Heard about how, 2 years back, a family outside Laramie lost 400 acres to a nearly identical claim. Old deed, suddenly disputed agent from out of territory, quiet settlement offered right before the hearing." Ellery leaned back in his chair. "The family took the settlement, sold the land for a fraction of its worth, rather than risk losing everything in court. I always suspected something wasn't right about it, but I never had proof." "You think this is the same person?" Lillian said. "I think it's worth finding out." Ellery pulled a fresh sheet of paper toward him. "I'll need everything you have. Your father's deed, the notice Whitmore delivered, anything Prescott told you about that missing page. And Mr. Cole, I have to ask you plainly. Do you have the funds to fight this in court, if it comes to a full hearing, Whitmore's clients, whoever they are, clearly have money to spend on lawyers and forged paperwork. That kind of fight isn't cheap. Nathan's jaw tightened. I have the ranch's income, cattle sales mostly. It should be enough. Should be isn't the same as will be. Ellery's eyes were sympathetic but honest. I'd start preparing for the possibility that this gets expensive before it gets resolved. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them turning the day over in their minds, and it was nearly dusk by the time the house came into view. Agnes Whitfield was waiting on the porch, arms crossed, the particular posture of a woman who'd been standing there worrying for hours. "Well?" she said, before either of them had even climbed down. "It's worse than we thought," Nathan said. "Someone's built a fraudulent claim against the North Pasture, cut pages out of the county ledger to make it look legitimate." Agnes's face went pale. "Cut pages, Lord above." She pressed a hand to her chest. "What kind of man does something like that?" "A man named Silas Whitmore," Lillian said. "He's the agent filing the claim, though he wouldn't say who's paying him." Agnes went very still. "Whitmore," she repeated slowly. "Silas Whitmore." Nathan looked at her, catching something in her voice. "You know that name?" "I might." Agnes's hands twisted together. "It's a common enough name, I suppose. I wouldn't want to say something I'm not certain of." "Agnes," Nathan's voice sharpened. "If you know something, now is not the time to keep it to yourself." "It's nothing certain," Agnes said, but her eyes wouldn't meet his. "Just an old memory, and old memories play tricks. Let me think on it a while longer before I say something I might have wrong." She turned and went inside before either of them could press further, and Lillian exchanged a look with Nathan that carried the same unspoken question neither of them dared say out loud yet. That night, sleep wouldn't come for Lillian. She lay in her small room off the kitchen, listening to the house settle around her, thinking of Whitmore's smile, the cut page, Agnes's sudden silence. She was still awake when she heard footsteps in the hallway, soft, careful, the particular quiet of someone trying not to wake anyone. She rose and opened her door to find Nathan standing in the hall, fully dressed, despite the hour, a lantern in his hand. "You couldn't sleep either," he said. "No. I keep thinking about that missing page." He set the lantern down on a side table. If someone forged an older claim, they had to create a paper trail that would hold up under a judge's scrutiny. That takes time. Planning. Whoever's behind this has been working on this for months, maybe longer, waiting for the right moment to move. "Which means they were watching you," Lillian said. "Waiting for something." "Waiting for what?" Lillian hesitated, then said the thought that had been forming since the courthouse steps. "Waiting until you had something to lose that mattered more than the land itself. A person, maybe. Someone they could use as leverage, the way Whitmore tried today, mentioning me in front of you like that." Nathan's expression darkened. "If anyone tries to use you against me, Lillian, they'll regret it." "I'm not afraid of Whitmore." "Maybe you should be a little afraid," Nathan said quietly. "I've fought cattle thieves, and I've fought drought, and I've fought men who thought this land was theirs for the taking, with nothing but a gun and a bad idea. I've never fought someone willing to forge government records to steal a home out from under a family. That's a different kind of enemy, and I don't know yet how far he's willing to go." The lantern flickered between them, and for a moment neither of them spoke, the silence carrying more weight than words could have. "Nathan," Lillian's voice was barely above a whisper. "Whatever happens with the land, I want you to know, staying here working in this house, knowing you, it's already given me more than I ever expected out of this life. No matter how this ends." Something moved across Nathan's face, raw and unguarded. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the lantern light reflected in his eyes. "Lillian, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you say anything back." "All right. I came into town that morning to buy feed sacks. That's all I meant to do that day." His voice had gone low, rough at the edges. "And then I watched Constance Caldwell try to make you feel like nothing, and something in me that had been quiet for 6 years woke up and wouldn't go back to sleep. I've spent every day since telling myself I was only being decent, only doing what any honest man would do. And now I don't think I can keep telling myself that." He reached up, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear, with a gentleness that made her breath catch. "I think I've been falling for you since the moment you looked up at me from the mud and didn't ask for a single thing, not even an apology, when the whole world owed you one." Lillian's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "Nathan!" The sound of shattering glass cut through the house like a gunshot. Both of them froze. Then Nathan was moving lantern in hand toward the kitchen, Lillian right behind him. A rock lay on the kitchen floor amid broken glass from the window, a piece of paper wrapped around it and tied with twine. Nathan knelt and unwrapped it with hands that had gone steady again, all the softness from moments before hardening into something harder, more dangerous. He read it once. His face went white. "What does it say?" Lillian asked. He handed it to her without a word. "Sell the North pasture at fair price within the week, or lose it and everything on it for nothing. Get rid of the girl. She doesn't belong in this. Last warning." Lillian's hands were shaking as she lowered the paper. "They know about me," she said quietly. "They know I'm here." "They're not going to touch you." Nathan's voice had gone to iron. "Not while I'm breathing." Outside, somewhere in the dark beyond the porch, hoofbeats faded into the distance. Whoever had thrown the rock was already gone, leaving nothing behind but broken glass, and a threat neither of them would forget. By morning, Nathan had every ranch hand awake before sunrise, walking the property line with rifles, checking fences, watching the road. Agnes moved through the kitchen with tight, controlled movements, saying nothing, though Lillian caught her glancing toward the window more than once, her expression unreadable. "Agnes," Lillian said finally when the two of them were alone peeling potatoes at the table. "Last night, when Nathan mentioned Whitmore's name, you knew something. I could see it in your face." Agnes's knife stilled against the potato. "I told you," she said. "I wasn't certain." "Are you certain now?" Agnes set the knife down. Her hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly against the table's edge. "There's something you should understand about this ranch," she said quietly. "And about Nathan. And about a name that hasn't been spoken in this house in 6 years." "Sarah," Lillian said softly. Agnes's eyes flew up, startled. "He told you about her?" "A little. Not much. Only that her father sent her away, and that Nathan never got the chance to fight for her." Agnes was quiet for the long moment, her gaze distant, caught somewhere in the past. "Her father was Judge Harlan Averill. A hard man, proud, the kind who believed his daughter marrying a rancher was beneath the family name, no matter how much land Nathan owned or how honest he was." She exhaled slowly. "Silas Whitmore worked as a clerk in Judge Averill's courtroom for years before he went into land dealing. I saw him myself more than once, delivering papers to this very house back when Nathan and Sarah were still courting." The room went very still. "You're saying," Lillian said slowly, "that the man trying to steal this ranch used to work for the judge who tore Nathan and Sarah apart. I'm saying I believe this has nothing to do with land at all," Agnes said, her voice dropping. "I believe Harlan Averill never forgave Nathan for refusing to walk away quietly 6 years ago. I believe this whole forged claim, every cut page, and every threat might be an old man's revenge finally coming due, and I believe if that's true, he won't stop with the land." Lillian felt something cold settle in her chest. The pieces of the last 2 days rearranging themselves into a shape far more dangerous than a simple property dispute. "We need to tell Nathan," she said, already rising from the table. "Right now." But before she'd taken 3 steps toward the door, it swung open, and Nathan stood in the frame, his face gray, a fresh piece of paper crumpled in his fist. A telegram, judging by its shape, delivered no doubt by a writer who'd come and gone while they'd been talking. "Nathan," Lillian said, "what's happened?" He looked up at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, Nathan Cole looked genuinely afraid. "The hearing's been moved up," he said. 9 days. Judge Harlan Averill is presiding." Nathan stood in the doorway with the telegram crushed in his fist, and Lillian felt the floor tilt beneath her, though nothing in the kitchen had actually moved. Judge Averill, she repeated. Agnes just told me who he is. Then you already know what this means. Nathan's voice had gone flat, controlled in the way of a man holding himself together by sheer will. This was never about a missing page in a ledger. This is Harlan Averill finishing something he started 6 years ago. Agnes rose from the table, her hands still trembling. Nathan, I should have told you the moment Whitmore's name came up. I'm sorry. I wasn't certain, and I didn't want to send you chasing ghosts if I was wrong. You're not wrong. Nathan smoothed the telegram against the table, though the creases stayed stubborn. 9 days. He's moved the hearing up by 3 weeks and assigned himself to preside over it. A man doesn't do that unless he already knows exactly how he wants it to end. Can he even do that? Lillian asked. Preside over a case involving a man he clearly has a personal history with. Legally, he's required to recuse himself if there's a conflict. Nathan's jaw tightened. But Averill's the only circuit judge covering 3 counties right now. His replacement isn't due through Cheyenne for another 2 months. He'll claim there's no one else available, and technically, he won't be lying. Then he's using the shortage as cover, Lillian said. That's not justice. That's a man using his office to settle an old score. That's exactly what it is. Nathan folded the telegram once sharp. I need to get word to Ellery. Today. Thomas Ellery's small office above the Mercantile was crowded with the smell of ink and worry. By the time they arrived, papers spread across his desk in every direction. 9 days. Ellery said, reading the telegram twice, like the second reading might change the words. Mr. Cole, I won't lie to you. This is bad. Averill's reputation precedes him. He's fair when he has no stake in a matter, but I've heard stories from lawyers in Cheyenne about what happens in his courtroom when he does. Can we request a delay? Lillian asked. Argue we need more time to prepare a defense. We can request it. Ellery didn't look hopeful. Averill can deny it, and given that he's the one who moved the date up in the first place, I doubt he'll grant us the extra time we're asking for. Then we need to be ready in 9 days, Nathan said. Whatever that takes. What it takes, Ellery said slowly, is proof. Real, undeniable proof that the older claim Whitmore's presenting is a forgery. Right now we have suspicion and a cut page. That's not enough to stand against a judge who's already decided how this ends before it begins. Where do we find that kind of proof in 9 days? Ellery was quiet for a moment, tapping his pen against the desk. There's a territorial land office in Laramie. Every homestead claim filed in this district gets a duplicate copy sent there for archive, separate from the county recorder's book. If someone tampered with the copy here in Cheyenne, they'd have needed to tamper with the Laramie copy too, or the discrepancy would be obvious. You think they missed it, Lillian said. I think it's possible. Cutting a page from a county ledger is one thing. Getting into a territorial archive 2 counties away is considerably harder. Ellery looked between them. Someone would need to ride to Laramie, request the archived copy, and bring it back before the hearing. That's 4 days of hard riding there and back minimum, which leaves precious little time to prepare anything else. I'll go, Nathan said immediately. You can't. Ellery shook his head. If you're gone from the ranch for 4 days with a hearing this close, and something happens here, another threat, another act of vandalism, you won't be here to answer it. And frankly, Mr. Cole, you're too recognizable. If Whitmore has eyes watching you, which I'd wager he does, he'll know exactly where you've gone and why within a day. Then who? Lillian felt every eye in the room turn toward her before she'd even finished the thought herself. I'll go, she said. Lillian, no. Nathan turned to her immediately. Whoever sent that rock through the window knows your name. They told me to get rid of you. I'm not sending you out on the open road alone. I'm not asking your permission, Nathan. The words came out steadier than she expected. I worked in a judge's office for 2 years. I know exactly what an archived land claim looks like, how to request one, what questions to ask the clerk without raising suspicion. You'd be recognized within an hour of arriving in Laramie. I wouldn't. It's dangerous. Staying here and doing nothing is dangerous too, Lillian said. I'd rather be riding toward something than sitting in that kitchen waiting to find out if the next rock through the window has worse than a warning attached to it. Nathan looked at her for a long moment, something warring behind his eyes, fear, and underneath the fear, something that looked almost like pride. "I'll send Cody with you," he said finally. "You're not riding to Laramie alone. That's not a request either." Lillian allowed herself a small, tired smile. "That I'll agree to." They left before dawn the next morning. Cody riding point with a rifle across his saddle, and Lillian close behind the sky, still bruised purple at the edges, when the ranch fell away behind them. They rode hard, stopping only to water the horses, and Lillian used the miles to steady the fear sitting in her chest, fear that had less to do with Whitmore's threats, and more to do with the way Nathan had looked at her on the porch before they left, like a man memorizing something he was afraid he might lose. "He's sweet on you," Cody said around midday, breaking the long silence between them. "Not that it's my business to say." "You're right, it isn't. I've worked that ranch 3 years. Cody went on anyway. "Never seen him look at anybody the way he looks at you, not even Miss Sarah, and everybody thought that was the great love of his life." Lillian kept her eyes on the road. "What happened to her, Sarah?" "Went east is what I heard. Her daddy shipped her off before Mr. Cole could stop it. Some folks say she wrote him letters for a year after begging him to come get her, and her father burned everyone before Nathan ever saw them." Lillian's stomach turned. "That's cruel." "Judge Averil's a cruel man when it comes to his pride," Cody said. "Everybody in 3 counties knows it. He'd rather burn a thing down than let it belong to somebody he didn't approve of." The words settled into Lillian like a stone dropped into still water rings spreading outward, touching every fear she'd been trying to keep quiet since the telegram arrived. Laramie's territorial land office was smaller than Lillian expected, tucked between a saddlery and a bank, and the clerk behind the counter, a tired older man named Osgood, looked up with mild curiosity when she approached. "I need to request an archived copy of a homestead claim." Lillian said, her voice steady, businesslike the voice she'd used for 2 years in a judge's clerking office and hadn't forgotten how to wear. "Section 14, Township 9, filed 1868, under the name Elias Cole." Osgood squinted at her. "You family. I'm assisting the family's attorney in preparing documentation for an upcoming hearing." She kept her tone even. "It's a routine request, Mr. Osgood. I only need the archived copy to confirm the original filing details." He studied her a moment longer, then shrugged and disappeared into the back room, and Lillian let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. It took nearly 20 minutes. When Osgood returned, he was carrying a thin folder slightly yellowed, and he set it on the counter with the careless confidence of a man handling something ordinary. Lillian opened it with hands that wanted to shake and made herself hold steady. The seal was round. The date matched. The description of the land matched Nathan's copy, exactly filed and witnessed the same day, no gap on the page where an earlier claim might once have existed. "This is it," she breathed. "There's no earlier filing. Nothing before Elias Cole's name on this section ever." "Something wrong, miss?" Osgood asked. "No." Lillian closed the folder carefully. "Everything's finally right. I need a certified copy of this, Mr. Osgood, with your seal and signature. It's going to be presented as evidence in a courtroom in 9 days, and I need it beyond any question of doubt." Osgood's eyebrows rose, but he nodded slowly. "That I can do. Give me an hour."
Yes, sir.
They rode back through the night trading watches, so one of them could sleep in the saddle, the certified copy wrapped in oilcloth and tucked inside Lillian's coat, like something precious enough to die protecting. They were less than 3 miles from the ranch first light, just beginning to gray the sky, when Cody's horse suddenly shied hard, nearly throwing him. "Rider," he hissed, pulling his rifle free in one smooth motion. Up ahead off the road, Lillian's heart slammed against her ribs. "Whitmore's men, stay behind me." The figure that emerged from the tree line wasn't Whitmore, and it wasn't one of Whitmore's men either. It was a woman, thin, well-dressed despite the early hour, her face pale beneath a traveling bonnet, standing alone beside a horse that looked like it had been ridden hard through the night.
"I'm not here to hurt anyone,"
the woman called out, her voice trembling. "Please, I need to speak with whoever's carrying papers for Nathan Cole. It's urgent." Cody kept his rifle raised. "Who are you?" The woman's chin lifted, some old courage steadying her voice, even as her hands shook at her sides. "My name is Sarah Averill," she said. "I'm the judge's daughter, and I have information that could save Nathan's ranch if you'll let me speak before my father realizes I've left the house."
"Dapakunts."
They brought her back to the ranch under cover of the last gray dark before sunrise, and Nathan came out onto the porch at the sound of hoofbeats, his rifle already in hand, ready for exactly the kind of trouble that had haunted the household for days. He froze the moment he saw her face. "Sarah." "Hello, Nathan." Her voice broke on his name. "I know I have no right to come here. I know 6 years is a long time to disappear without a word. But I heard what my father is doing to you, and I couldn't stay silent, not this time." Nathan lowered the rifle slowly. His face a battlefield of emotions Lillian had never seen cross it before. Shock, old grief, something that might have once been love, and beneath all of it, a wariness that hadn't fully surrendered. "You look well," he said finally, which wasn't at all what his face was saying. "Don't." Sarah's eyes glistened. "Don't be kind to me. I don't deserve it. I wrote you letters for a year, Nathan, every week. I don't know if you ever received a single one." "I never did." His voice had gone rough. "I thought you'd simply stopped loving me, stopped thinking of me at all." "My father burned them," Sarah said, and the words seemed to cost her something enormous to speak aloud. "I only learned that 2 months ago going through his desk, after he'd had too much brandy and fallen asleep in his study. A whole drawer of them, Nathan. Every letter I ever wrote you, unopened, unsent, hidden away, like they never existed." Lillian watched Nathan absorb this. Watched 6 years of quiet grief rearrange itself into something closer to fury. "Why come now?" Nathan asked. "Why not 2 months ago when you found them?" "Because I was afraid," Sarah admitted. "Because my father has spent 6 years teaching me that defying him costs more than I could survive paying. But then I heard what he's doing to you, forging claims, threatening a woman who's done nothing but work in your household." Her eyes flickered toward Lillian, for the first time something like understanding passing between them. "I couldn't let him do to your life what he already did to mine. Not again. Not while I had breath enough to stop it. What do you know, Sarah?" Nathan's voice had gone urgent now. "About the claim. About Whitmore." Sarah reached into her coat and pulled out a small bundle of papers, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped them. "My father hired Silas Whitmore 8 months ago," she said. "I overheard them in his study twice, though. I didn't understand what I was hearing until recently." Whitmore forged an older land filing, using a blank territorial form my father had access to through the courthouse. He paid a clerk in Cheyenne, the man you spoke to Prescott, to cut the original page from the county ledger, to make the forgery look more convincing. "You have proof of this?" Lillian asked, stepping forward. "I have this." Sarah held out the papers. A letter in my father's own hand instructing Whitmore on exactly how to proceed, referencing payments already made to Prescott for his cooperation. "I found it in the same drawer as my letters. I don't fully understand why he kept it pride, maybe. Men like my father don't believe anyone will ever hold them accountable for anything." Nathan took the papers with hands that had gone unsteady, reading them by the gray light of almost dawn, and Lillian watched his face go through disbelief, then fury, then something that looked almost like grief for the years his family's name had spent under threat because of one man's cruelty. "This is it," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "This is everything Ellery needs." "There's something else," Sarah said quietly, and something in her tone made everyone go still. "My father isn't only doing this for pride, Nathan. There's money involved. A mining company out of Denver approached him 18 months ago about the mineral rights beneath your north pasture. He's had geological surveys done in secret. That land isn't worth what you think it's worth, Nathan. It's worth a fortune, and my father intended to take it from you, then sell the rights before anyone in this territory ever learned what he'd done. The porch went silent, except for the first birds beginning to stir in the gray morning light. He was never punishing me for loving you, Nathan said, slowly, understanding dawning across his face like something breaking apart and reforming into a shape that finally made sense. He was using our history as a convenient excuse to steal something worth more than either of us ever imagined. I believe so, Sarah said. I'm so sorry, Nathan. For all of it. For every year I let you believe I'd simply stopped caring. Nathan looked at her for a long moment, and Lillian watched something settle in him. Not the old love rekindling she realized with quiet relief, but something closer to forgiveness. The particular piece of a man finally understanding a wound he'd carried without ever knowing its true shape. Thank you for coming, he said, for risking whatever this costs you. It's already cost me everything, Sarah said quietly. My father will know I'm gone by midday. I don't intend to go back. They brought the letter and Sarah both to Ellery's office within the hour, and the young lawyer read the document twice, his exhaustion cracking slowly into something like hope. This, Ellery said, changes everything. A written instruction from Judge Averill himself detailing the forgery referencing payment to a county clerk for tampering with public records. This isn't circumstantial anymore, Mr. Cole. This is a judge orchestrating criminal fraud from his own bench. Can we use it? Nathan asked. In front of Averill himself. We'll have to file for his removal before the hearing even begins, Ellery said, already writing. Present this letter to the Territorial Judicial Council. Request an emergency review of Averill's fitness to preside, given clear evidence of personal misconduct. It's unusual. It's also exactly what this situation demands. How long will that take? If we're fast, and if the council takes it seriously, which I believe they will, given this evidence, we could have a different judge assigned before the 9 days are up. Ellery looked up, something fierce in his tired eyes. Mr. Cole, I've practiced law in this territory for 4 years, watching men like Averill and Whitmore operate above consequence because nobody had the proof or the courage to challenge them directly. This is the first time I've had both in the same room. Sarah, sitting quietly in the corner, spoke up for the first time since they'd arrived. There's one more thing you should know, Mr. Ellery. My father isn't a patient man, and he isn't a man who loses gracefully. If he learns I've given you that letter before the council acts, he won't wait for a courtroom to retaliate. What do you mean? Lillian asked. I mean he'll come here, Sarah said quietly. To the ranch. And I don't believe he'll come alone or come reasonably. Don. The warning proved true, faster than any of them expected. They were barely back at the ranch, the letter safely locked in Nathan's study alongside the certified Laramie copy, when Cody came pounding up the porch steps, breathless and pale. Riders, he gasped. 4 of them coming up the east road. One of them's Whitmore, another's Mr. Cole, I think the older man's Judge Averill himself. Nathan's face went to stone. How far out? 10 minutes, maybe less. Lillian. Nathan turned to her immediately. I want you and Sarah inside, upstairs, door locked. No! Lillian's voice came out firmer than she expected, surprising even herself. Nathan, if Averill's coming here, he's coming to intimidate you into backing down before the council can act on that letter. If he sees you alone without a single witness beyond your own hands, it's your word against a judge's. If Sarah and I are standing beside you, he can't lie about what was said here without both of us to contradict him. Nathan searched her face, torn between the instinct to protect her and the understanding that she wasn't wrong. Stay close to me, he said finally. Both of you. If anything happens, if this turns dangerous in a way, words won't fix you. Get inside, no arguing. Agreed, Lillian said, and Sarah nodded beside her, her face pale but resolved. The riders arrived exactly as Cody had described, 4 horses kicking up dust on the east road. Whitmore's gray suit unmistakable even at a distance. and beside him an older man who sat his horse with the rigid posture of someone accustomed to rooms, falling silent when he entered them. Judge Harlan Averill dismounted slowly, his eyes finding Sarah first, and something cold and furious moved across his face. "Sarah!" His voice was quiet, controlled, somehow more frightening for its lack of heat. "You will come home with me now." "No, Father." Sarah's voice shook, but she didn't move from Nathan's side. "I won't. You don't understand what you've done." Averill's eyes cut to the letter-shaped bulge visible beneath Nathan's coat, and something like genuine fear flickered behind his fury. "Whatever you believe you've given these people, it changes nothing. I am still the presiding judge in this district. I still hold every advantage in that courtroom, regardless of what paper you've stolen from my desk. We've already filed for your removal, Judge Averill," Nathan said, stepping forward, his voice steady despite everything. "With the Territorial Council. Your letter to Whitmore in your own hand, detailing the forgery and the payment to Prescott, it's already in their possession." Averill's composure cracked just slightly, just enough for everyone standing on that porch to see the fear beneath the fury. "You have no idea the mistake you're making," he said, low and dangerous. "I have spent 30 years building a reputation in this territory. I will not allow a rancher's daughter and a housekeeper with no family name to destroy it over a piece of land. It was never about the land for you, was it?" Lillian said the words coming before she'd fully decided to speak them. "It was about proving you could still control your daughter's life even 6 years after you tore her away from the man she loved. And somewhere along the way, greed found you a fortune in mineral rights, and you decided both prizes were worth the same forgery." Averill's eyes snapped to her, cold and assessing. "And who exactly are you to speak to me this way? I'm the woman who rode to Laramie and back in one night to find the proof that says you're a liar and a thief hiding behind a judge's robes," Lillian said, and she felt Nathan's hand find hers steady and certain as she said it. "I'm the woman standing beside a man you tried to destroy twice now, and failed both times." Whitmore stepped forward, his practiced smile finally slipping entirely. "This is beneath you, Judge. Threats and posturing on a ranch porch. We should discuss terms privately as gentlemen." "There will be no terms," Nathan said. "There will be a hearing with a different judge and a letter that proves exactly what both of you did. And when it's finished, Averill, I intend to see that you never sit behind a bench in this territory again." Averill's face went through fury calculation and finally something that looked almost like defeat, though his voice remained hard as iron when he spoke again. "You think this ends today," he said. "You think a stolen letter and a housekeeper's courage will be enough to stop me. I have 30 years of favors owed to me in this territory, Cole. Friends on the council you've just petitioned. This isn't finished. Not by half." He turned, mounted his horse with sharp, furious movements, and looked back one final time, not at Nathan, but at Sarah standing tall beside the man her father had once torn her away from. "You'll regret this," he said quietly. "Both of you will." Then he rode away, Whitmore, and the other 2 riders following close behind, dust rising in the morning light, like something being erased. The porch stood silent for a long moment after they'd gone. "He's not finished," Sarah said quietly, still trembling. "You heard him. He won't simply accept the council's decision if it goes against him." "No." Nathan agreed, his hand still holding Lillian steady, despite everything that had just happened. "But neither are we." Lillian looked at him, at the ranch behind him, at Sarah standing pale but resolute beside them, and felt something settle in her chest that hadn't been there in 8 long years. Not certainty that everything would be fine, because nothing about the next 9 days was certain. But the quiet, steady conviction that whatever came next, she wasn't facing it alone anymore. And somewhere down this east road, dust still rising behind 4 departing riders, Lillian understood with sudden clarity that Harlan Averill's threat hadn't been an ending. It had been a promise that the worst was still coming. The threat should have frightened Lillian into silence. Instead, it woke something steadier in her, something that had been sleeping since the day Constance Caldwell tried to shrink her down to nothing on Main Street. "He'll go after Prescott first," she said once the dust from Averill's departure had settled and the porch had gone quiet again. If Prescott's the weak link who cut that page, Averill will either buy his silence permanently, or make sure he disappears before Ellery can put him in front of the council. Nathan's hand tightened around hers. You think Averill would hurt a county clerk to protect himself? I think a man who forges land claims and burns his own daughter's letters isn't drawing many lines, Lillian said. Sarah nodded slowly, her face still pale from the confrontation. She's right. My father doesn't leave loose threads, he cuts them. Then we get to Prescott first, Nathan said, already turning toward the barn. Tonight. Nathan, Lillian caught his arm. If you ride into Cheyenne looking for a county clerk in the middle of the night and something happens to him after you've been seen there, who do you think Averill's friends on that council will believe caused it? Nathan stopped. The truth of it landed visibly on his face. She's right again, Ellery said, appearing on the porch steps with his coat half-buttoned, having ridden out the moment word reached him. You can't be anywhere near Prescott right now, Mr. Cole. I'll go myself as his legal counsel of record. If Averill's men are watching anyone tonight, better it's a lawyer doing his job than a rancher with a grudge. I'm coming with you, Lillian said. Absolutely not. Nathan said at the same moment Ellery said, That's probably wise, actually. Nathan turned on him. Excuse me? Prescott's frightened, Ellery said. Frightened men don't respond well to more men showing up demanding answers. But a woman who already showed him kindness at that counter, who already proved she understood the ledgers better than he expected, he might talk to her when he wouldn't talk to either of us. Nathan looked at Lillian, torn between every protective instinct he had and the plain sense of what Ellery was saying. I'll be careful, Lillian said quietly. I promise you that. He exhaled long and slow and finally nodded. I'm riding as far as the edge of town with you. I won't come inside, but I'm not letting you make that ride alone in the dark either. Prescott's house sat on a narrow lane behind the courthouse, and when Lillian knocked, it took nearly a full minute before the door cracked open, revealing the clerk's face, gone gray and hollow, like a man who hadn't slept in days. Miss Hayes. His voice was barely above a whisper. You shouldn't be here. I know you're frightened, Mr. Prescott. I'm not here to threaten you. Lillian kept her voice gentle, the way she might have once spoken to a child who'd broken something and was terrified of the consequences. I only want to understand what happened, what they made you do, and why. Prescott's composure cracked all at once, his shoulders folding inward. They said it was a small thing. Cut one page, they said. Nobody reads deed books that closely anyway. Whitmore paid me $40 more money than I earn in 2 months, and I told myself it was harmless. It wasn't harmless. I know that now. His voice broke. I have a wife, Miss Hayes. 2 children. When Whitmore came back last week, he wasn't offering money anymore. He said if I ever spoke a word of what I'd done, he'd make certain my family suffered for it. I don't know how to protect them and tell the truth at the same time. Lillian's chest ached with a familiar, painful recognition, the particular terror of a person with nothing standing between them and ruin, forced to choose between survival and honesty. Mr. Prescott, listen to me, she said. Right now you're protecting Whitmore and Averill, and they'll discard you the moment you're no longer useful. That's what men like them do. But if you tell the truth to Ellery sworn and documented, you become someone the Territorial Council needs to protect, not silence. Your family will have more safety in the truth than in this silence you're carrying. Prescott stared at her for a long moment, his eyes wet. They'll ruin me, he whispered. They're already ruining you, Lillian said softly. You just haven't let yourself see it yet. He was quiet for so long Lillian thought she'd lost him. Then he stepped back from the door, opening it wider. Send your lawyer to me tomorrow morning, he said, his voice shaking but resolved. Early, before anyone's watching the street. I'll tell him everything. Every dollar, every threat, every instruction Whitmore gave me. Relief flooded through Lillian so fast it nearly buckled her knees. Thank you, Mr. Prescott. You're doing the right thing. I hope you're right about that, he said quietly and closed the door. Nathan was waiting at the edge of town exactly where he'd promised, pacing beside his horse, and the moment Lillian's cart came into view, He was moving toward her before she'd even fully stopped. Well, he'll talk tomorrow morning to Ellery's sworn testimony about the money and the threats. Lillian let out a breath she'd been holding the whole ride back. It's more than we had an hour ago. Nathan reached up and helped her down from the cart, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary, and in the moonlight, Lillian could see the fear that had been sitting in him the entire time she'd been gone. I didn't like waiting out here not knowing what was happening in there, he admitted quietly. I told you I'd be careful. You did. His voice roughened. Doesn't mean I liked it any better. They stood close in the dark for a long moment, and Lillian felt the pull of everything unspoken between them. The confession on the porch 2 nights ago interrupted by a rock through the window. The confrontation with Avril that had swallowed every private moment since. Nathan, she said softly. Before on the porch. You said you'd been falling for me since the day we met. I meant it. I need you to know something too. Her voice trembled slightly, but she pushed through it. I spent 8 years believing I wasn't worth staying for, that I was something people tolerated until they found a reason to leave. You never once made me feel that way. Not for a single day. Nathan's hand came up to cup her face gentle in a way that made her breath catch. You were never something to be tolerated, Lillian. You were something I didn't know I was still capable of wanting until you were standing right in front of me. He kissed her, then slow and certain, and every fear Lillian had carried for 8 years went quiet. If only for the length of that single moment beneath a sky full of stars. Neither of them was watching. The sound of a distant gunshot shattered it apart. Nathan was already moving before the echo faded, swinging up onto his horse. That came from the ranch. Lillian's heart lurched into her throat. Sarah's there. Agnes. Get in the cart. Follow as fast as you can. Nathan was already spurring his horse into a gallop, and Lillian scrambled up onto the cart seat, whipping the reins with a desperation that shocked her. The ranch road blurring past in the dark as fear clawed its way up her spine. By the time she arrived, the yard was chaos. 2 ranch hands with rifles raised. Agnes standing on the porch with a shotgun of her own, and Nathan already dismounted, crouched beside something in the dirt near the barn. Nathan! Lillian was out of the cart before it had fully stopped. What happened? Is anyone... Nobody's hurt, Nathan called back, though his voice was tight with fury. Somebody tried to burn the barn. Cody caught him before he got the match lit, fired a warning shot, and the man ran for it. Relief and fear tangled together in Lillian's chest. Did anyone see who it was? I did. Cody stepped forward, still breathing hard, rifle in hand. One of the 2 riders who came with Avril this afternoon. I got a good enough look at his face in the lantern light. I'd know him again. Avril's escalating, Agnes said grimly from the porch. He's not waiting for the council anymore. He's trying to destroy what he can't legally take. Nathan's jaw was tight enough to crack. Then we don't wait either. He turned to Ellery, who'd arrived moments behind Lillian, still catching his breath. How fast can that letter and the Laramie deed reach the council? I can have a rider leave for the territorial capital tonight, Ellery said. With everything we have, the letter, the certified deed, and by tomorrow Prescott's sworn statement. It won't reach them instantly, but it's the fastest path we have. Do it, Nathan said. Tonight. I want Avril removed before he burns this ranch to the ground, trying to make sure nobody ever sees that letter in a courtroom. The rider left within the hour, and the household spent what remained of the night in uneasy vigilance. Lanterns lit rifles within reach, every creak of the house, sending hands toward weapons that hadn't been needed in years. Lillian found Sarah sitting alone in the kitchen, near dawn. Her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, gone cold, staring at nothing. You should try to sleep, Lillian said gently, sitting across from her. I can't. Sarah's voice was hollow. Every time I close my eyes, I see my father's face on that porch. I keep thinking, what if the man who tried to burn that barn tonight had succeeded? What if someone had been hurt? That would be because of me. Because I brought that letter here. No. Lillian reached across the table, covering Sarah's hand with her own. That would be because of your father. You didn't create this danger, Sarah. You had the courage to expose it. Those are two very different things. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I spent 6 years believing my silence was protecting people, protecting myself, and all it did was give him 6 more years to believe he could do whatever he wanted without consequence. You're not silent anymore, Lillian said. That matters more than you know. Sarah studied her for a long moment. Nathan looks at you the way I always wished he'd looked at me, she said quietly, without bitterness. I used to think what we had was love. Watching the two of you these past 2 days, I understand now it was something smaller, fondness maybe, comfortable and safe. What you have with him, that's something I never had with anyone. Sarah, it's all right. Sarah managed a small, genuine smile. I'm glad he found it. After everything my father took from him, he deserves it. Morning brought Ellery back to the ranch with news that landed like a fresh blow. Prescott had given his sworn statement exactly as promised, detailing every dollar and every threat, but he'd also revealed something none of them had anticipated. There's a second clerk involved, Ellery said, spreading his notes across the kitchen table. A man in the Territorial Land Office in Laramie. Averill paid him as well insurance in case anyone thought to check the archived copy. Lillian's blood went cold. The certified copy I brought back, is it compromised? No, Ellery said quickly. Prescott says the Laramie clerk was paid to alter the archive but got cold feet before he could act. The timing worked in our favor. He never touched the file. Your copy is clean. But it means Averill's reach is wider than we realized, and it means he had a backup plan in place from the very beginning, in case the county ledger alone wasn't enough to convince a judge. Which means he's been planning this for months, Nathan said grimly. Long before Whitmore ever showed up at my north pasture. Since the mining survey, Sarah said quietly. 18 months at least. The room absorbed this in heavy silence. There's something else, Ellery said, and something in his tone made everyone still. Word reached me this morning that Averill's requested an emergency session with 2 other territorial judges. Old friends of his, from what I understand. I believe he's trying to get ahead of our petition to the council, present his own version of events before ours arrives. Can he do that? Lillian asked. He can try. Whether it works depends entirely on how much good faith he still has left with the council and how fast our evidence reaches them first. Ellery rubbed his tired eyes. This has become a race, Mr. Cole. Whoever's story reaches the council first with the most credible evidence is likely to shape everything that follows. Then we can't wait for a rider covering the distance in stages, Nathan said, already standing. I'll ride to the territorial capital myself. Today. Nathan, that's 2 days hard riding, Lillian said. You said yourself you couldn't be seen leaving the ranch during a crisis like this. The crisis has already found us, Nathan said. A man tried to burn my barn last night. Waiting quietly hasn't kept anyone safe. I'd rather ride into that council chamber and put this letter in their hands myself than trust it to chance. Then I'm coming with you. Lillian, you're not leaving me behind again, Nathan. Her voice was steady, unshakable. Not after everything. If you're riding into that capital to fight for this ranch, for this family, I intend to be standing beside you when you do it. Nathan looked at her, and something in his expression softened, even amid all the fear and urgency crowding the room. All right, he said quietly. Together then. Man. They left within the hour. Cody riding escort once more the letter, and certified deed wrapped carefully in oilcloth inside Nathan's coat. And the 2 days of hard riding that followed blurred into exhaustion, brief snatched hours of sleep, and a growing gnawing fear that they wouldn't arrive in time. On the second night, camped beside a low fire with Cody keeping first watch. Nathan sat close beside Lillian, both of them too exhausted for much conversation, though neither wanted to close their eyes yet either. Can I ask you something? Lillian said quietly. Anything. If we win this, if the council removes Averill, if the claim gets thrown out and the ranch stays yours, what happens then to us? She hesitated. I don't want to assume anything, Nathan. I know these past days have been about survival, not about Lillian. He turned to face her, fully firelight, catching the exhaustion and the certainty both written across his face. I've known what I wanted since the night that rock came through the kitchen window, and all I could think about standing over broken glass was making sure you were safe. Not the ranch. Not the land. You. He took her hand. When this is finished, however it finishes, I intend to ask you to stay, not as my housekeeper, as something considerably more permanent than that. Lillian's breath caught tears rising unexpectedly. Nathan. I'm not asking now, he said gently. Not like this, exhausted on a cold trail with half the territory trying to steal my land out from under me. You deserve better than a proposal made beside a campfire at the end of a desperate ride. But I wanted you to know where my heart's already landed, so you're not wondering. She leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. And for a moment, surrounded by danger on every side, Lillian let herself simply feel the quiet, solid warmth of being wanted. Not tolerated, not pitied, but wanted for the first time in her whole life. They reached the territorial capital by midday, exhausted and travel-worn, and the council chambers were already crowded with clerks and petitioners, when Ellery's contact, a sympathetic council secretary named Mrs. Pemberton, hurried them through a side entrance. "You're not a moment too soon," she said breathlessly. "Judge Averill arrived yesterday evening. He's been in closed session with 2 council members most of the morning." Nathan's face went hard. "Has he presented anything yet?" His version, as I understand it, paints this as a simple property dispute, complicated by a rancher's personal vendetta against him, stemming from an old romantic disappointment. Mrs. Pemberton's mouth thinned with distaste. "He's a persuasive man, Mr. Cole. I won't pretend he isn't." "Then it's time the council heard the truth instead," Lillian said. Mrs. Pemberton led them into a smaller antechamber, where 3 council members sat behind a long table. And the moment Nathan laid the letter, the certified deed, and Prescott's sworn statement before them, the room's entire temperature seemed to shift. The eldest council member, a stern-faced man named Judge Colby Marsh, read the letter twice in complete silence before looking up. "This letter is in Judge Averill's own hand, verified against 3 separate documents he's signed in his official capacity." Ellery's written affidavit confirmed which Nathan handed over next. "A handwriting expert in Cheyenne has already compared them. And this clerk Prescott will testify to receiving payment for altering county records." "Under oath, yes," Nathan said. He's terrified of Judge Averill's retaliation, which itself should tell this council something about the character of the man you're being asked to trust. Judge Marsh exchanged a long look with the 2 council members beside him. "Mr. Cole, Miss Hayes." He set the letter down carefully, like something too dangerous to hold too long. "I've sat on this council 11 years. I have rarely seen evidence this damning presented against a sitting judge. If this holds up under formal review, and I have every expectation that it will, Harlan Averill will not simply be removed from your case. He'll likely face criminal prosecution for fraud and obstruction, and quite possibly lose his position on the bench entirely." Relief crashed through Lillian so powerfully her knees nearly buckled, and Nathan's hand found hers, instantly steadying her. "What happens now?" Nathan asked. "Now," Judge Marsh said, rising from his chair. "We confront him with this evidence directly in this building before he has any further opportunity to interfere with your case or intimidate your witnesses. I want him removed from this courtroom's authority before the sun sets today." The confrontation, when it came, happened in a hallway outside the council chambers, and Lillian would remember for the rest of her life the exact moment Harlan Averill's composure finally completely shattered. He emerged from a side office expecting Lillian imagined to continue shaping his own narrative uncontested. Instead, he found Judge Marsh waiting with the letter in hand, Nathan and Lillian standing just behind him. "Harlan," Marsh said, his voice carrying the particular weight of a man who no longer needed to raise it to command a room. "We need to discuss a letter that's come into this council's possession. One written in your hand to a land agent named Silas Whitmore, detailing the forgery of a homestead claim." Averil's face went through disbelief first, then fury, then for just a moment quickly buried genuine fear. "That letter is a fabrication," he said. "Stolen, likely forged itself by desperate people trying to save a piece of land they never rightfully—" "Your daughter delivered it to us herself, Father." Sarah's voice cut through the hallway, and Lillian turned to see her standing at the far end, having arrived with Ellery just moments before her chin lifted, despite the visible tremor running through her. "I found it in your desk drawer beside every letter I ever wrote to Nathan that you told me he never answered. Letters you burned rather than send." Averil's face went the color of old ash. "Sarah, you don't understand what you've done." "I understand perfectly," Sarah said, her voice breaking, but not stopping. "You've spent 6 years telling me love was something to be controlled, discarded, decided by you alone. I'm done believing that, Father. I'm done believing anything you've told me." The hallway had gone utterly silent, every clerk and council member within earshot frozen in place, watching a man's carefully constructed reputation collapse in real time. "I did everything for this family," Averil said, but his voice had lost its iron, gone thin and desperate. "The mining rights alone would have secured our name in this territory for generations." "You admitted it," Judge Marsh said quietly. "In front of witnesses in this hallway, you've just confirmed everything in that letter." Averil's eyes widened, understanding his own mistake a heartbeat too late. "Harlan Averil." Marsh continued, his voice heavy with the formality of a decision already made. "You are hereby removed from all judicial authority in this territory, effective immediately pending full criminal review of fraud, forgery, and abuse of judicial office. Territorial marshals will escort you to formal detention within the hour." Averil's composure broke entirely, then his face twisting between rage and something close to despair. He looked at Sarah one final time, opened his mouth as though to say something, and found apparently that there was nothing left to say that could undo what he'd done. 2 marshals stepped forward and led him away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor until they finally faded into silence. Sarah stood very still, tears streaming freely now, and Lillian moved to her side without hesitation, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You did that," Lillian said softly. "You saved him, Sarah. And you saved yourself in the process." "I don't know what happens to me now," Sarah admitted, her voice small. "I have no home to return to, no father who'll claim me after this." "You have somewhere to stay as long as you need it," Nathan said firmly, stepping close. "The ranch has more than enough room, Sarah. Whatever else has passed between us, you did something today that took more courage than I've seen from most men I've known. You're welcome under my roof for as long as you need." Sarah's tears spilled over freely now, relief and grief tangled together. "Thank you, Nathan, for everything, for understanding after all these years that none of it was ever truly my choice to make." The formal ruling came 2 days later, delivered by a newly appointed judge with no history in Willow Creek and no reason to favor anyone. Elias Cole's original homestead claim was declared valid beyond any legal question. The fraudulent filing struck permanently from every county and territorial record, and Silas Whitmore, facing his own mounting legal exposure once Averil's protection evaporated, was reported to have fled the territory entirely rather than face charges. Nathan received the news standing in his own kitchen, Lillian beside him, Agnes wiping tears from her eyes at the stove, and for a long moment nobody said anything at all, the relief simply too large for words to hold. "It's over," Nathan finally said, disbelief and joy warring in his voice. "The ranch is ours. Truly, finally, legally ours, with no shadow hanging over it anymore. It's over," Lillian repeated softly, and felt something in her chest that had been clenched tight for 8 long years finally fully release. Nathan turned to her, then taking both her hands in his, and something in his expression made the whole kitchen go quiet, even Agnes pausing at the stove to watch. "Lillian?" He said, his voice rough with emotion. He wasn't bothering to hide anymore. "I told you on that trail I wanted to ask you something properly when the danger had passed and I could give you the moment you deserved. I don't want to wait one more day to say it. Lillian's heart was pounding so loudly she was certain the whole room could hear it. "I don't have a ring prepared," Nathan continued, and there was something achingly earnest in the admission. "I don't have flowers, or a speech I practiced, or any of the things I imagine a woman deserves in a moment like this. All I have is the truth, which is that I have never in my life wanted anything the way I want to spend the rest of my days with you beside me." He knelt right there in the kitchen amid the smell of Agnes's cooking and the golden afternoon light spilling through the windows, and looked up at Lillian with an expression that held nothing back. "Lillian Hayes," he said, "will you marry me?" Lillian felt tears spill down her cheeks, not the tears of a woman who'd spent 8 years believing she was nothing, but the tears of a woman who had finally completely been proven wrong about her own worth.
"Yes,"
she whispered, and then louder laughing through her tears.
"Yes, Nathan. Yes, 1,000 times, yes."
He rose and pulled her into his arms, and the kitchen erupted. Agnes crying openly, now Cody whooping from the doorway where he'd apparently been listening the whole time. Sarah smiling through her own tears at the sight of a happiness she'd once believed she'd have for herself, and had instead helped make possible for someone else. Outside, the Wyoming sky stretched wide and golden over land that would never again be threatened, over a home finally truly safe. But Lillian understood, even in the midst of her joy, that safety and happiness weren't quite the same thing as belonging. Belonging was something she was only just beginning to learn how to hold. The kitchen was still ringing with laughter when Cody came through the door a second time, breathless in a different way than before. Not with joy this time, but with something that made every face in the room turn toward him at once. "Rider coming up fast," he said, "from the marshal's office in Cheyenne." Nathan's arm tightened around Lillian without him seeming to notice he'd done it. "Avril." "Don't know yet. Man's not stopping to explain himself, just riding hard." The celebration didn't die exactly, but it went quiet, the way a room goes quiet when everyone remembers all at once that danger doesn't always announce itself before it arrives. Agnes set down her dish towel. Sarah's hand found the back of a chair to steady herself. The rider, when he reached the porch, turned out to be a young deputy. Lillian didn't recognize his horse lathered white with the effort of the ride. "Mr. Cole." He was still catching his breath. "Marshall sent me straight out. Thought you'd want to know before you heard it secondhand in town." "Know what?" "Silas Whitmore." The deputy swallowed. "He didn't leave the territory like everybody assumed. Marshall's men found him still holed up at a boarding house outside Cheyenne, packing to run. When they went to arrest him on the fraud charges, he pulled a pistol, wounded one of the marshal's men before they subdued him." Lillian felt the floor tilt beneath her feet for the second time that week. "Is the marshal's man all right?" "He'll live. Grazed his shoulder is all." The deputy hesitated, glancing toward Nathan. "But there's more, sir. Before they got the pistol away from him, Whitmore said something. Said he wasn't finished. Said Avril wasn't the only one with friends in this territory, and that he intended to make sure the Cole Ranch paid for what happened to him one way or another." The kitchen, which moments before had been full of tears and celebration, went cold and still. "He's in custody now," Nathan said carefully. "That threat came from a desperate man facing prison. It doesn't mean anything." "Maybe not, sir." The deputy didn't look convinced. "Marshall just wanted you warned. Whitmore's got 2 days before his hearing. Man with nothing left to lose sometimes finds a way to cause trouble anyway." After the deputy rode off with a fresh horse and a meal, Agnes insisted on packing for him. The household sat in a heaviness that hadn't been there an hour before. "I won't let this frighten me out of happiness," Lillian said quietly, though her hands folded in her lap weren't entirely steady. "We've fought too hard to get here." "Neither will I," Nathan said. But Lillian saw the way his eyes kept drifting toward the window toward the road, the same watchfulness that had lived in him since the night a rock came through the glass. The wedding was set for 11 days out. Enough time, Ellery assured them, for Whitmore's hearing to run its course for whatever remained of the danger to resolve itself one way or another before vows were exchanged. Word of the engagement moved through Willow Creek faster than any of them expected, and with it came something Lillian hadn't anticipated: the town's opinion of her. which had spent 8 years calcifying into something cruel and dismissive, began slowly and unevenly to shift. It started small. Mrs. Petrie from the dry goods store, who had never once in 3 years offered Lillian more than a curt nod, stopped her on the boardwalk to ask with something like genuine warmth whether she'd chosen her wedding fabric yet. "I have some lovely ivory silk just come in from Denver," Mrs. Petrie said. "I thought of you the moment I unpacked it." Lillian stood there a moment, unsure how to respond to kindness that had never been offered to her before, from a woman who'd watched her scrub floors and carry laundry through that same street for years without a second glance. "That's very generous, Mrs. Petrie. Thank you." "Well," the older woman's cheeks colored slightly, "I suppose we none of us always see clearly what's right in front of us until circumstances make us look harder." It wasn't quite an apology. But Lillian understood, walking away with a swatch of ivory silk folded carefully in her basket, that it was the closest thing to one this town knew how to offer. Not everyone's opinion softened so easily. Constance Caldwell found her 3 days later outside the church, where Reverend Michaels had agreed to perform the ceremony, and the older woman's face carried none of Mrs. Petrie's uncertain warmth. "I hear congratulations are in order." Constance said, her voice pleasant in the particular way that made Lillian's spine straighten with old familiar wariness. "Thank you. Of course, I imagine it must feel like quite a triumph. The laundry girl marrying into the wealthiest ranch in the county." Constance's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Rather like a fairy tale, isn't it? Though I do wonder sometimes what happens to fairy tale girls once the wedding's over and the shine wears off. Whether the prince still finds them quite so remarkable once the whole town's stopped watching." Lillian felt the old instinct rise in her, the urge to shrink, to apologize, to make herself smaller so the cruelty would have less to land on. She recognized it, named it silently, and let it pass through her without taking hold. "Mrs. Caldwell," she said, "I spent 8 years in this town believing every unkind thing you and people like you said about me. I believed I was nothing that I deserved. Nothing, that kindness was something other people got to have, and I simply hadn't earned my share. I don't believe that anymore. I don't think I'll ever believe it again, no matter what you say to me on a church step." Constance's mouth opened, then closed. "Nathan didn't rescue me." Lillian continued, steady now, the words coming easier than she expected. "He simply saw something true about me that this whole town had trained itself not to look at. That's not a fairy tale, Mrs. Caldwell. That's just what happens when somebody finally bothers to pay attention." She walked past Constance without waiting for a response, and though her heart was pounding, she didn't look back to see the other woman's expression. She didn't need to. For the first time in 8 years, it didn't matter to her what that expression was. The relief of that small victory lasted less than a day. It was Sarah who found the letter slipped beneath the ranch house door sometime in the night, and her face when she carried it to Nathan and Lillian at breakfast told them, before she'd said a single word, that something was badly wrong again. "This was outside the door this morning," she said, holding it out with a hand that trembled. "It's addressed to you both." Nathan unfolded it, and Lillian watched his expression harden into something dangerous as he read. "What does it say?" she asked. He handed it to her without a word. "Whitmore's hearing has been postponed. Evidence has gone missing from the marshal's office, the pistol used in his arrest, along with witness statements. Someone with resources is working to see the charges dismissed entirely. You should know your enemies did not end with one judge's arrest. A friend who wishes to remain unnamed." Lillian's stomach dropped. "Evidence missing. Nathan, that means someone inside the marshal's office is helping him. Or someone's paid them to," Nathan said grimly. "Whitmore doesn't have that kind of money or influence on his own. Not without help." "Avril," Sarah whispered. "He's in custody, but he still has friends. People who owe him favors." "Even from a jail cell?" Lillian asked. "Especially from a jail cell," Sarah said, her voice hollow. "Desperate men call in every favor they have left. My father has 30 years of them to call on." Nathan was already reaching for his hat. "I need to speak with the marshal directly. If evidence has gone missing, someone needs to answer for it before Whitmore walks free entirely. "I'm coming with you," Lillian said, rising immediately. Lillian were 8 days from the wedding. "And I intend to marry a man who's still standing with a ranch that's actually safe, not a man who rode alone into a town where his enemies are apparently still buying favors." She was already reaching for her coat. "We do this together, Nathan. That was never going to change just because we're getting married." Something in his face softened, despite the tension gripping the room, a flicker of the same helpless love that had first cracked through his careful composure weeks ago. "All right," he said. "Together." The marshal's office in Cheyenne was in an uproar by the time they arrived, deputies moving in and out with grim faces, and Marshal Hutton himself looked like a man who hadn't slept in 2 days. "Mr. Cole." He rubbed his eyes. "I assume you've heard?" "The missing evidence, yes. Somebody got into the evidence room 3 nights ago. Pistols gone. So are the sworn statements from the deputies who witnessed the shooting." Hutton's jaw tightened. "I've got my own men to answer to for it, and I intend to find out exactly who's responsible. But I won't lie to you, Mr. Cole. Without that evidence, the assault charge against Whitmore is considerably weaker. He'll likely still face the fraud charges from the land claim, but a good lawyer could argue self-defense or confusion on the shooting without a pistol and witness statements to contradict him." "And the fraud charges?" Lillian asked. "Surely those still stand regardless of the missing pistol." "They stand," Hutton confirmed. "But fraud alone for a first offense, even one this serious, he's looking at a fine and perhaps a short sentence, not the years he'd have faced for shooting a marshal's deputy." Nathan's hands curled into fists at his sides. "Someone paid to make this go easier for him. I intend to find out who," Hutton said. "But Mr. Cole, I'll tell you plainly, if it's someone with real money and real influence behind them, this could take time I don't have, and resources this office doesn't have either." Lillian felt something settle in her chest, cold and clear. "Marshal Hutton, may I ask something? Who else had access to that evidence room in the last 3 days?" "Myself, 2 deputies on rotation, and—" Hutton stopped. "And," Nathan pressed, "a clerk who processes filing for the circuit court," Hutton admitted slowly. "Name's Garrett Voss. He's worked here 11 years. Never given me a reason to doubt him before." "Has he had any unusual visitors recently?" Lillian asked. "Or come into money he shouldn't have?" Hutton's face shifted, something clicking into place behind his tired eyes. "As a matter of fact, he mentioned 3 days back that his sister's ranch outside Laramie was in trouble with the bank. Said he was relieved a debt had been settled unexpectedly. I didn't think much of it at the time." "I'd think very hard about it now," Nathan said. Confronting Voss took less effort than any of them expected. The clerk, when Hutton brought him in for questioning with Nathan and Lillian present, lasted less than 10 minutes before his composure crumbled entirely. "I didn't want to do it," he said, his voice shaking, his eyes wet. "A man came to me, didn't give his name, but he knew things about my sister's debt that nobody outside the family should have known. Said the debt would disappear if I made certain evidence disappear too. Said if I refused, he'd see to it my sister lost the ranch inside a month." "Who was the man?" Hutton demanded. "Older gentleman, well-dressed, spoke like someone accustomed to giving orders." Voss's hands twisted together. "He mentioned a name once talking to someone else outside the jail. I think he didn't realize I could hear. Said the judge would be pleased." Lillian's breath caught. "Averil's still directing this from his cell." "It would appear so," Hutton said grimly. "I'll need your full statement, Voss, and I'll need to know exactly which guard's been carrying messages in and out of that cell, because a man in custody doesn't arrange favors without help from inside." Voss nodded miserably, and within the hour, a second arrest was made. A jail guard named Fenwick, who'd been quietly relaying messages between Averil and his network of favors outside the walls, for a fee that had apparently seemed reasonable until the moment it landed him in a cell of his own. "Averil loses his remaining privileges immediately," Hutton said once both men were secured. "No visitors, no messages in or out solitary confinement, until his own trial. I should have tightened this the moment he was brought in. I let my guard down because I didn't think a man in his position could still cause this much damage. Men like Averill are most dangerous exactly when everyone assumes they've lost their power, Nathan said quietly. They rode back to the ranch with the evidence question resolved, but the underlying fear not fully settled. Whitmore's hearing rescheduled the pistol and statements recovered from where Voss had hidden them, but the reminder unmistakable that danger didn't simply end because a villain had been arrested. It lingered in whatever threads he'd left behind waiting to be pulled. Sarah met them at the door, her face anxious. Well, what happened? Nathan explained it all, while Agnes poured coffee with hands that shook slightly, and when he finished, Sarah sank into a chair, like the weight of it had finally caught up to her. "He'll never stop," she said quietly. "Even from a cell, he'll keep trying to control everything around him. That's who my father is. That's who he's always been. He's lost his position, his freedom, and now his ability to send messages," Lillian said gently. "Whatever power he still imagines he has, Sarah, it's shrinking every single day." "I know." Sarah's eyes were wet. "I just wonder sometimes if it will ever be small enough to stop frightening me." Lillian reached across the table and took her hand. "It will. I promise you it will. I spent 8 years believing the voices that told me I was worthless would never go quiet. They did, Sarah. Slowly, but they did. Yours will too." Whitmore's rescheduled hearing came 4 days later, and this time with the pistol and witness statements recovered with Prescott's testimony and Sarah's evidence all properly entered into record, the outcome was swift and unambiguous. Guilty on all counts: fraud, forgery, obstruction, and assault against a marshal's deputy. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Everly, brought in specifically because of her total lack of connection to Averill's old network, sentenced Whitmore to 8 years in the territorial prison, with no possibility of an early release given the severity of the combined charges. Nathan and Lillian sat in the gallery holding hands as the sentence was read, and when Whitmore was led from the courtroom in shackles, he turned once searching the room until he found them. "This isn't finished," he said, his voice carrying despite the marshal's attempt to hurry him along. "Averill has more friends than either of you understand. You'll never feel safe on that land, not really. Not ever again. Get him out of here!" Judge Everly said sharply, and the doors closed behind him with a finality that echoed through the courtroom. Lillian felt Nathan's hand tighten around hers, and though Whitmore's parting threat had landed somewhere cold and uncomfortable in her chest, she found when she searched herself for the old familiar fear that it simply wasn't there in the way it once would have been. "He's trying to frighten us because it's the only power he has left," she said quietly. "It doesn't work anymore, Nathan. Not on me." "Not on me either," Nathan said, and meant it. Averill's own trial, held 3 weeks later, ended with a sentence that stunned even those who'd followed every twist of the case: 15 years for fraud, forgery, obstruction of justice, and abuse of judicial office. A sentence severe enough that whispers moved through the territory for months afterward about the fall of a man who had once seemed untouchable. Sarah didn't attend the sentencing. She sat instead in the ranch kitchen, hands wrapped around a cup of untouched tea, waiting for word to arrive. 15 years, Nathan told her gently once he and Lillian returned from the courthouse. Sarah absorbed the number slowly, her face unreadable for a long moment. "I thought I'd feel relieved," she finally said. "Or triumphant, maybe. Instead, I mostly just feel tired. Is that strange?" "No," Lillian said softly. "That's not strange at all. It's exhausting carrying a fight that big for as long as you carried it. Relief doesn't always arrive the way we expect." "What happens to me now?" Sarah asked, and the question carried a vulnerability that made both Nathan and Lillian's hearts ache for her. "I have no father waiting for me, no family name that means anything anymore. I don't even know who I am outside of being his daughter." "You're the woman who found the courage to burn down a lie her father had been building for a decade," Nathan said firmly. "That's not nothing, Sarah. That's not even close to nothing." "You'll find your own path," Lillian added. "It might take time. It took me 8 years to understand my own worth, and I only found it because a stranger knelt down in the mud one morning and refused to walk past me. Sometimes it just takes one person believing in you before you can believe in yourself." Sarah looked up, something like hope flickering behind her exhausted eyes. "Do you think that could still happen for me? After everything?" "I think," Lillian said, smiling gently, "that a woman brave enough to do what you did has a great deal more waiting for her than she realizes." The wedding, when it finally arrived, was smaller than Constance Caldwell's earlier sneering prediction of a grand society affair, and larger in every way that mattered than Lillian had ever let herself imagine for her own life. The old oak tree beside the ranch house had been decorated simply wildflowers, gathered by Agnes and Sarah Ribbon, donated by Mrs. Petrie, without being asked, a modest gathering of ranch hands townsfolk whose opinions had genuinely softened, and Ellery standing near the front with the particular pride of a man who'd helped fight for every inch of the happiness now unfolding in front of him. Lillian wore the ivory silk sewn by her own careful hands with help from Agnes's steadier ones, and when she walked toward Nathan beneath that old oak tree, she felt none of the old fear that had once told her she didn't deserve moments like this. Nathan's eyes, when she reached him, were wet with an emotion he made no effort to hide. "You look," he said, his voice rough, "like every good thing I never let myself believe I'd have."
"So do you,"
Lillian whispered, and meant it with her whole heart. Reverend Michaels spoke the words that bound them together, and when Nathan kissed her as husband and wife, the small crowd erupted into applause and cheering loud enough to send birds scattering from the old oak's branches, and Lillian laughed through happy tears wrapped in her husband's arms, surrounded by people who had finally truly seen her. The years that followed carried their own ordinary joys and ordinary struggles, the kind Lillian had never dared imagine for herself, precisely because they were ordinary, because nobody threatened to take them away. She started a small school in town within the first year, teaching children from families as poor as she'd once been, refusing to let a single one of them grow up believing the way she had, that poverty made a person less deserving of kindness. Nathan built the schoolhouse himself alongside Cody and two other ranch hands, refusing to accept a single dollar for the labor. Sarah stayed at the ranch for nearly a year before finding her own path. She began corresponding with a doctor in Laramie, a widower with two young daughters, and though it took time and careful courage for her to trust happiness again after everything her father had cost her, she eventually left Willow Creek, not in flight this time, but in hope, writing to Lillian faithfully every month about a life finally entirely her own. Constance Caldwell never became a friend exactly, but she enrolled her granddaughter in Lillian's school the following spring. And something in that small, wordless gesture said more than any apology could have. Agnes stayed on at the ranch until her final years, insisting stubbornly on working the kitchen, long after Nathan and Lillian gently tried to convince her to rest, until the day she finally agreed, grumbling the entire time that perhaps she'd earned a little peace. 10 years after the morning Constance Caldwell had tried to shrink Lillian down to nothing on a muddy street, the town of Willow Creek held a modest celebration for the schoolhouse's anniversary, and Lillian stood at the front of a room full of children, some of them now grown, some of them new. All of them taught that their worth was never something anyone else had the right to measure. Nathan watched from the back of the room, the same quiet pride in his eyes that had never once dimmed in a decade of marriage, and when their own daughter, 7 years old and fearless, in a way Lillian had never been allowed to be at that age, ran up to tug at her mother's skirt with a question about the lesson. Lillian knelt down without a second thought, and answered her with the same patience and respect she gave to every child in that room. That evening, sitting together on the porch, where so much of their story had unfolded, the confession interrupted by a rock through glass, the proposal delayed by danger, the countless nights spent afraid of what tomorrow might bring. Nathan took Lillian's hand, the way he had 1,000 times before, and neither of them needed words to hold the weight of everything they'd survived together. "Do you ever think about that morning?" Nathan asked quietly. "Outside the mercantile, every year on the day it happened," Lillian admitted. "I think about how close I came to believing Constance Caldwell's words were true. How many more years I might have spent believing them if you hadn't knelt down in that mud. I didn't give you your worth, Lillian. Nathan's voice was steady, certain the same conviction he'd carried since the very beginning. I only saw it. It was there the whole time, waiting for somebody to finally look. Lillian rested her head against his shoulder, watching the Wyoming sky settle into evening color, over land that had once been threatened and was now unshakably home. Not because a court had ruled it so, not because a fraud had been defeated, but because two people had built something true on top of every hardship that had tried to break them. She thought of the girl who'd knelt in the mud, believing herself forgotten, and she thought of the woman she'd become, a wife, a mother, a teacher, a woman the whole town now turned to instead of away from. She had spent 8 years believing she was nothing. She knew now with a certainty nothing could ever again shake loose, that she had always been something extraordinary, and it had simply taken one honest man's kindness to help her finally fully see it. And on the wide Wyoming plains, beneath a sky that had witnessed every storm they'd weathered together, Lillian Hayes Cole understood at last and forever that she had never once been forgotten. She had only ever been waiting to be found.